Hello and welcome to another edition of Foreign Dispatches. I'm Teniola Shoboale. On the program this week, over 3 million people in Ukraine flee to neighboring countries amid the Russian-Ukraine crisis. 3 weeks of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and health officials say a humanitarian crisis is unfolding where hundreds of thousands of civilians are trapped in cities without water, food and electricity. Russia's offensive has resulted in heavy shelling and missile attacks in the capital Kyiv, as well as major cities like Kharkiv and Mariupol. Russia has been met this week by more sanctions from Ukraine's allies. Here's a roundup of events this week.
The world watches as yet another week in Ukraine is marked by violence, with many civilians, including children, reportedly killed. While Russia's invasion has not gone as many experts predicted, it has been devastating for Ukrainian civilians. The United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres says Ukraine is being decimated and the situation in the country is getting worse.
Ukraine is on fire. The country is being decimated before the eyes of the world. The impact on civilians is reaching terrifying proportions. Countless innocent people, including women and children, have been killed. After being hit by Russian forces, roads, airports and schools lie in ruins. According to the World Health Organization, at least 24 health facilities have suffered attacks. And with each passing hour, two things are increasingly clear. First, it keeps getting worse. Second, whatever the outcome, this war will have no winners, only losers. Further escalation of the war, whether by accident or design, threatens all of humanity. Raising the alert of Russian nuclear forces is a bone-chilling development. The prospect of nuclear conflict, once unthinkable, is now back within the realm of possibility. The security and safety of nuclear facilities must also be preserved. It's time to stop the horror unleashed on the people of Ukraine and get on the path of diplomacy and peace.
Kyiv awoke to the sound of air raid sirens on Tuesday as two powerful explosions rocked the Ukrainian capital before dawn. Firefighters tried to douse the flames and rescue workers helped to evacuate residents trapped in a building that had been struck. As the war in Ukraine rages, Kharkiv, the country's second biggest city, is under bombardment. From the city's remaining residents, the metro system has now become more than just a shelter. It is home to hundreds of the city's men, women and children. The city has suffered some of the heaviest shelling since the Russian invasion began last month.
We are, as the DG again has said, working very hard with many partners to get emergency medical teams on the ground. But how can we put emergency medical teams on the ground if the very facilities that they may want to go and support are going to be attacked and going to be bombed and going to suffer catastrophic damage? This crisis is reaching a point where the health system in Ukraine is teetering on the brink. This isn't just about the destruction of buildings. This is about the destruction of hope. But this is about taking away the very thing that gives people the reason to live. The fact that their families can be taken care of, that they can be cured if they're sick, that they can be treated if they're injured. This is the most basic of human rights, and it has been directly denied to people. And we are then in a position where we can't send assistance to those people because the very act of attacking those facilities or not taking care to avoid those facilities means we can't send the appropriate help when it's needed.
Humanitarian corridors have been opened to evacuate civilians and deliver humanitarian aid to those trapped by Russian forces. This includes to the besieged city of Mariupol, which has been under constant bombardment, leaving hundreds of thousands of residents sheltering without water or power for almost a week. Health agencies say the situation is critical.
Hundreds of thousands of people remain without aid today. They are unable to leave the city today, and they are essentially being suffocated in this city right now with no aid and with dire situation and very much dwindling supplies. So ultimately, I come back to this point that Mariupol, the situation is absolutely desperate, and we need a solution there, and an agreement essentially between the parties to bring aid in and to allow people to come out. In the course of just ultimately a few days and weeks, people are forced to take extreme means to survive. Gathering water from streams and other openly available places where they can, because there's simply a lack of clean water easily accessible. Food is increasingly a rarity, and we know that there have been, unfortunately, fights between people for food and for fuel. This is an extreme situation of life and death where people are facing impossible choices as to how to feed their families and themselves, and are trapped in this city.
In the meantime, the EU has unveiled its fourth set of sanctions against Russia, aimed at crippling its ability to finance the invasion.
That's the strongest package of sanctions ever adopted by the European Union in its history. That's a historical decision. You will have more than 600 Russian people targeted. You will have a large part of the financial system being targeted by those sanctions. You will have a new ban on some exportation like the luxury goods. And we will withdraw to the Russian state the most favored nation clause within the World Trade Organization, which will allow us, all the 27 member states, to increase the level of trade tariffs on all Russian goods.
A further 370 Russian individuals and entities have been hit by UK sanctions that include asset freezes and travel bans. This list includes former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev. The UK has also hit Russia with trade restrictions, including an additional 35% tariff on vodka.
Now, we will enhance our work with allies to respond to Russia's aggression. We need to be strong to get peace. That is why we are building on efforts to cut off the funding for Putin's war machine through sanctions. And today, Madam Deputy Speaker, I can announce we will go further than ever before by hitting over 360 more people complicit with Putin's regime. They range from former President Dmitry Medvedev and Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, to Putin's propagandist, Maria Zakharova. This means, after today, we will have designated over 1,000 individuals and entities under our Russian sanctions regime. We have led the way in our financial sanctions, targeting 10 Russian banks, and we have hit over £300 billion worth of Russian bank assets. All this amounts to the toughest sanctions package of any country.
Reacting to some of the latest sanctions, Russia barred 13 Americans from entering the country, including US President Joe Biden. But the White House on Tuesday made light of Russia's retaliatory sanctions against US officials, saying Moscow may have inadvertently sanctioned the late father of Joe Biden by omitting the suffix Jr. from the spelling of the US president's name.
I would first note that President Biden is a junior, so they may have sanctioned his dad. May he rest in peace. The second piece I would say is that won't surprise any of you that none of us are planning tourist trips to Russia. None of us have bank accounts that we won't be able to access, so we will forge ahead.
And while Ukraine's allies continue with the sanctions, Kiev says what it really needs now is more weapons.
What we need is the supply of any type of weapons that we can receive, with a special focus on the anti-air and everything to stop their dominance in the air. Because again, when they saw that they cannot achieve anything on the ground, and I just have to remind you that at the beginning they said that Kyiv would fall in 20 hours. They have sent their troops in without any support or any logistical support for more than 1 or 2 days. When they saw that they are not able to do it, which is a disgrace for an army of whatever, the second largest army, or whatever they claim to be, they resorted to terror. So air is something that we need an urgent support with. Protect Ukraine from these brutal attacks they are doing from the air. And this is the ask number one, and this is something that we are discussing with all of our friends and allies.
Paving the way for more support to Ukraine, US President Joe Biden has signed a spending bill that includes $13.6 billion in security assistance.
This bill also includes historic funding, $13.6 billion, to address Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the impact on surrounding countries. Putin's aggression against Ukraine has united people all across America, united our two parties in Congress, and united freedom-loving world. And it's an act with urgency and resolve that we're doing right now that you've provided me the ability to do. I want to thank the congressional leadership for working so quickly to make sure we have the resources we need, economic, humanitarian, and security, to continue our forceful response to this crisis. We've already committed more than $1.2 billion in security assistance to the people of Ukraine just over the past year. And I know all of you know that. It's preaching to the choir here. But we've been providing anti-armor, taking out tanks, anti-air capabilities directly to the Ukrainian forces. And we're also facilitating significant shipments of security assistance from our allied partners to Ukraine.
Russia on Tuesday quit the Council of Europe, the continent's leading human rights watchdog, preempting an expected expulsion over its attack on neighboring Ukraine. Russia is only the second country to leave the pan-European group tasked with upholding human rights and the rule of law since its formation after World War II.
And today's decision is not against the people of Russia. It is against the autocratic, kleptocratic, oppressive regime of Putin. United today, our decision will become a beacon for all fighters for strong democratic institutions around the world. A beacon for those who even today are bravely fighting for a different Russia and Belarusia, one of freedom and human rights and of peaceful cooperation in a wider Europe of democratic values.
We are, of course, sad that we today had to ask to expel a member of our organization, which has been a member for over 25 years. But I'm glad that we dared to do it. It is clear, if you cross red lines, then there is no place for you in this organization.
And as fears of the humanitarian situation grows, Russia's ambassador to the United Nations says Moscow will stop its invasion when the goals of its special military operation are achieved in Ukraine, including demilitarization. He also says Russia will offer its own UN resolution on the humanitarian situation.
As you know, France and Mexico came with a humanitarian resolution on the situation in Ukraine. It has been already more than a week that they introduced the initial draft. And we said from the very beginning that we would be prepared to adopt a humanitarian resolution on the situation in Ukraine, provided that this is not a disguise to blame and shame Russia again.
Russian President Vladimir Putin launched the invasion on February the 24th in what Moscow calls a special military operation to demilitarize Ukraine and dislodge its neo-Nazi leaders. Kiev and its Western allies say this is a baseless pretext to invade a country of 44 million people.
As refugees continue to flee from Ukraine to Poland, officials say cities are struggling to accommodate people and are calling for an international system of support to be put in place. That's after the break. Please stay with us. Since Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered an invasion on February the 24th, over 3 million civilians have fled Ukraine in what the United Nations says is the fastest growing refugee crisis in Europe since World War II. While they've been welcomed by neighbouring countries like Poland and Romania, these countries are already struggling to accommodate them.
In a span of 20 days, millions have fled Ukraine as Russia's invasion continues. Those displaced within the country have moved to western Ukraine, but more than 3 million Ukrainians have left their homeland entirely. They are seeking refuge in Ukraine's neighbours, and more than 1.8 million have crossed the border to Poland. The nation that shares the border with Ukraine's west has become the first stop for those running for safety. And while the neighbouring nation has been welcoming refugees, it is now feeling the strain. The mayors of both Warsaw, the capital, and Poland's second largest city say they are struggling to accommodate the sheer number of people who are arriving and are urging the United Nations and the European Union to intervene. EU states have unanimously agreed to ease access to jobs, schools, healthcare and welfare services for Ukrainians. The UK has also introduced a Homes for Ukraine refugee scheme.
The scheme will allow Ukrainians with no family ties to the UK to be sponsored by individuals or organisations who can offer them a home. There will be no limit to the number of Ukrainians who can benefit from this scheme. The scheme will be open to all Ukrainian nationals and residents. They will be able to live and work in the United Kingdom for up to 3 years. They will have full and unrestricted access to benefits, healthcare, employment, and other support. Sponsors will have to provide accommodation for a minimum of 6 months, and in recognition of their generosity, the government will provide a monthly payment of £350 to sponsors for each family whom they look after.
Poland and other European nations have been accused of welcoming Ukrainian refugees with open arms, but not extending the same treatment to Syrians, Iraqis and Afghans. Critics say that the change in attitude is because of race.
Ukrainian citizens.
But the EU Home Affairs Commissioner says the bloc is simply better prepared for refugees than in the 2015 crisis.
So far we have achieved more than 2 million refugees from the war in Ukraine. And just to comparison, this is during 2 weeks, and that was the same number that we received in 2015 and 2016 altogether during that migration crisis. We are making progress, I think, on the pact right now, and I think that what we saw last week from the Council, where all the ministers unanimously agreed on the temporary protection directive to activate it. I think this is a really good sign that we also can make progress on the migration pact, the Pact on Migration and Asylum, because we are better prepared today than we were in 2015. There's a huge difference.
The EU believes the total number of refugees could climb to 7 million. It has granted Ukrainians who flee the war a blanket right to stay and work throughout the 27 nations for up to 3 years. The UN says apart from the refugee crisis, 9 out of 10 Ukrainians could be plunged into poverty if the war drags on over the next year, wiping out 2 decades of economic gains.
Protests have been taking place across the world in solidarity with Ukrainians ever since Russia launched its invasion. This week, we focus on a special type of support, music. Many musicians are organizing special concerts to help Ukrainians. Let's take a look.
Ukrainians were surprised by an impromptu concert on March 9 on Maidan Square in embattled Kyiv. The Kyiv Classic Symphony Orchestra performed Ukraine's national anthem and the European Union anthem, among other famous Ukrainian musical pieces.
This concert is action of peace. More important thing of modern humanity. And this concert, we would like to support our president, Vladimir Zelensky, who call and will call to all governments of the world, stop the war in Ukraine.
Odessa National Academic Theatre Orchestra also performed an open-air concert called Free Sky to support President Volodymyr Zelensky's call to close the sky over Ukraine and stop the war. And outside Ukraine, Israel's jazz musicians expressed their support for Ukraine with performances showcasing adaptations of Ukrainian songs.
It is hard to listen to music and to enjoy a concert in these days when a war is taking place in Ukraine. But I'm very happy to be part of this concert because it's a donation to the Ukrainian people, and so I can enjoy the music without the guilt of having fun when other people are suffering.
The proceeds from the concerts will be donated to organizations aiding Ukrainians.
As a musician, I felt completely powerless when there is a war. All of a sudden, there is nothing to do. And I was talking to my many musician friends in Ukraine, and I asked them, what can we do as musicians? And their answer was, we're musicians, we play concerts. So I decided to organize this concert and send a message of playing music of Ukrainian musicians, which I think now is a strong message considering that Russia is maybe trying to erase the Ukrainian identity.
Ukraine's ambassador to Israel, who attended the event, vowed to win the war and bring more Ukrainian musicians to Israel, and also make it possible for more Israeli musicians to go to Ukraine.
We celebrate together our culture, our spirit, and long live Ukraine. We will definitely win in this bloody war. And we definitely will be able to bring more musicians from Israel to Ukraine and from Ukraine to Israel.
In Turkey, hundreds of Russians lined up outside an Istanbul club to get a glimpse of Oxymoron, a rapper who rattled the Russian celebrity world with bold statements against his country's invasion of Ukraine. He has since announced a series of charity concerts entitled Russians Against War, the proceeds of which will be donated to help Ukrainian refugees fleeing. Around 400 concert goers chanted "No to War" in Russian as they waited to be admitted into the packed venue.
I don't like war, so I'm trying to follow the main message from the Bible, like don't kill, don't steal, and pretty much it. And then all around it, so I believe at least at 22nd century we can solve our problems in different ways.
And I came here to support my country. Since 50% of me is Russian, I'm proud to see people who are against of what is happening now in Russia. To me, Russian language is not language of Putin. It's language, first of all, of Dostoevsky or Tolstoy. So I'm glad that there are a lot of bright people who are not silent during the terrible times for their brothers.
The New York Metropolitan Opera this week held a benefit concert to support Ukraine. With Ukraine flags draped across the front of the house, the 70-minute program titled A Concert for Ukraine began with 23-year-old Ukrainian bass baritone Vladislav Buyalsky, a soloist in front of the Met Orchestra, and chorus and music director Yannick Nezet-Zaguin, starting the 90-minute program with Ukraine's national anthem. Other performances included A Prayer for Ukraine and Va Pensiero from Nabucco. Ticket proceeds will go to various relief efforts in Ukraine. Hundreds of civilians have been reportedly killed in the war so far, and 3 million people have fled Ukraine, in Europe's fastest-growing refugee crisis since World War II.
Well, this is where we say goodbye till next time, but remember, our top stories are never far away. You can catch them on channelcv.com. Thank you so much for watching the program. I'm Tenyola Shaboale. Bye for now.